Billionaire CEO's twins wouldn't stop crying at his wedding, until a black waitress shocked everyone. The wedding of the billionaire CEO was supposed to be a flawless display of wealth and power, a day where every detail sparkled under the chandeliers of the grand hall. Guests, dressed in glittering gowns and expensive suits, whispered about business deals. The bride stood adorned in her breathtaking gown, and cameras clicked endlessly to capture the perfect fairy tale moment. But just as the vows began, a piercing cry interrupted the polished scene. It was his twin sons, dressed in miniature suits, whose wails cut through the music and echoed across the hall. At first, people assumed it would end quickly, but the crying only grew louder, forcing heads to turn away from the couple at the altar. The bride's smile stiffened as whispers swept through the room, and the billionaire, usually a man of unshakable confidence, stood frozen in helplessness. The children's cries shattered the carefully constructed image of control, and the guests exchanged uneasy glances. Some tried to hide their smirks while others shook their heads in disapproval, wondering why no nanny or assistant had stepped forward. The groom's empire stretched across continents, yet he could not calm two small children in his moment of triumph. The noise grew unbearable, drowning out the officiant's words, and the once magical atmosphere transformed into one of discomfort. Photographers snapped pictures that would soon circulate, and many in the audience began to believe the wedding was heading toward disaster. The bride shifted impatiently, her eyes revealing frustration at being overshadowed by her future husband's restless children, while the billionaire's shoulders sagged in quiet defeat. It was then that an unexpected figure emerged from the back of the hall. A young black waitress, dressed in her uniform, had been silently observing the scene while serving drinks. She noticed the twins' distress and, with remarkable calmness, stepped forward. Guests gasped, some whispering in shock at her boldness. How could staff walk toward the altar in the middle of such a ceremony? Yet she moved with confidence, her steps steady as she knelt before the crying children. Without hesitation, she began humming a soft, soothing tune, one that carried a warmth no one else in the room could provide. Her voice, though gentle, wrapped around the children like a blanket of comfort. Slowly, the wailing softened into sniffles, and then silence filled the room. All eyes were fixed on her, as though she had performed a miracle. The twins looked at her with wide, trusting eyes before leaning against her shoulders, completely calm. The room fell into absolute stillness, and even the bride forgot her annoyance as she stared in disbelief. The billionaire's face transformed, from frustration to relief, his cold composure breaking into a genuine smile for the first time that day. In that moment, the waitress wasn't just part of the staff. She became the savior of the entire wedding. Cameras flashed again, but this time they weren't capturing wealth or luxury. They captured compassion, humility, and the unexpected hero of the night. The guests would leave remembering not the expensive decorations or the vows, but the young waitress whose kindness silenced the chaos and reminded everyone that some things money could never buy. The grand ballroom shimmered with gold and crystal as the billionaire CEO stood at the altar, prepared to exchange vows in what was meant to be the most perfect day of his life. Every corner of the hall spoke of wealth and power, from the glittering chandeliers to the orchestra playing softly in the background. The bride radiated in her gown. Cameras flashed from every angle, and guests whispered about the union that would not only symbolize love but also a merger of influence and prestige. Yet just as the ceremony reached its most important moment, a sharp cry pierced through the air, breaking the polished atmosphere like glass shattering on marble. His twins, dressed in miniature tuxedos, had begun to cry uncontrollably. At first, the guests chuckled, expecting it to end quickly, but the cries only grew louder, echoing against the high ceilings until they overpowered even the music. The bride forced a smile, but her eyes revealed irritation as the guests turned to watch. The children rather than her. The CEO, a man feared in boardrooms for his authority, looked helpless as he tried to calm them. His empire stretched across continents. He controlled industries with a single phone call. But at that moment, two small children made him powerless. The officiant hesitated, the words of the ceremony drowned out by the wailing, and the once magical atmosphere transformed into something painfully awkward. Whispers spread like wildfire among the elite, some smirking at the disruption while others shook their heads in judgment. Cameras clicked, capturing a moment that threatened to humiliate the billionaire on his grandest stage. Even the bride's composure cracked, her jaw tightening as she realized her spotlight was being stolen. Nannies and assistants rushed forward, but nothing seemed to work. Toys were offered, shushing noises were made, yet the children only cried harder, their little faces red with distress. The billionaire shifted uncomfortably, his polished image crumbling before the very people whose respect he valued most. For the first time, he appeared vulnerable, stripped of the control that defined his life. The murmurs of the crowd grew, louder. Was this a sign of neglect, a symbol of imbalance in his personal life, or a curse on his wedding day? Every second stretched endlessly, and the ceremony teetered on the edge of collapse. Then, from the back of the room, a young black waitress quietly placed down her tray and stepped forward. Her presence drew startled gasps. She was not meant to stand among the powerful, let alone walk toward the altar. Yet she moved with calm assurance, her eyes fixed not on the guests or the couple but on the frightened children. Kneeling before them, she began humming a soft, soothing tune, her voice gentle but filled with warmth. Instantly, the twins turned, their tearful eyes toward her, their cries softening as if the sound carried magic. Within moments, the wailing stopped, replaced by quiet sniffles as they nestled against her arms. The entire hall froze in disbelief, the silence more powerful than the chaos that came before. The bride stared wide-eyed, the guests whispered in awe, and the billionaire's stern expression melted into gratitude as he watched his children calm, so effortlessly. Cameras flashed again, but this time they captured something money could never buy: compassion and humanity. The waitress had restored peace to the wedding, reminding everyone that true power did not always come from wealth or status but from kindness. In that single moment, she became the heart of the story, the person who turned disaster into a memory no one in the room would ever forget. The wedding was designed to be flawless, a spectacle of wealth and elegance that reflected the stature of the billionaire CEO who was finally ready to tie the knot. The grand hall was dressed in luxury, with golden chandeliers glittering overhead, tables filled with roses imported from abroad, and a symphony playing softly to create the perfect mood. Guests in designer gowns and tailored suits whispered about the grandeur, waiting to witness vows that would unite not only two people but also two empires. Everything seemed under control until a piercing cry suddenly shattered the harmony. His twins, dressed in miniature tuxedos, had erupted in tears, their cries echoing through the hall with such force that even the music could not drown them out. At first, some guests chuckled, expecting the moment to pass, but the crying only grew louder, becoming the center of attention. The bride shifted uncomfortably, her perfect smile struggling to hold as whispers spread across the hall. All eyes drifted away from her gown and jewels to the restless children who refused to be silenced. The billionaire, a man used to commanding boardrooms with confidence and authority, looked uncharacteristically powerless. He bent down, trying to comfort them, but his attempts only seemed to make things worse. Nannies hurried forward, attempting to soothe the twins with toys and gentle shushing, but their wails only grew sharper. The ceremony stalled, the officiant waiting awkwardly as the noise swallowed every word. The bride's expression hardened, frustration visible even through her practiced composure, while the guests exchanged knowing glances. Some raised eyebrows, others smirked behind their glasses of champagne, and photographers eagerly clicked away, sensing the scandal this moment would become once splashed across headlines. For the first time in his career, the billionaire found himself trapped in a situation money and influence could not control. His children's cries tore through the carefully curated image of perfection, and the once magical atmosphere now felt suffocating with embarrassment. The whispers grew sharper. People questioned his parenting, speculated about a broken family, and judged the bride's barely hidden irritation. The wedding, meant to solidify his reputation, teetered on the edge of humiliation. And then, when it seemed nothing could save the moment, an unexpected figure emerged. A young black waitress who had been quietly serving drinks at the back of the hall, placed down her tray and walked forward. Her decision drew gasps from the elite crowd, who could not fathom why one of the staff would dare step into the spotlight. But she moved with grace and quiet confidence, her eyes not on the powerful guests but on the crying twins. Kneeling before them, she gently extended her arms and began humming a soft melody, her voice warm and steady. The effect was almost immediate. The children's cries softened into sniffles, their little bodies relaxing as if comforted by something familiar yet magical. Within moments, the grand hall, once filled with chaos, fell into complete silence. The twins clung to her as if they had always known her, resting their heads against her shoulders in peace. The guests stared in stunned disbelief. The bride froze with wide eyes, and the billionaire's stern face melted into gratitude as relief washed over him. Cameras flashed again, but this time they weren't capturing chaos. They captured compassion, humility, and an act of kindness that no amount of wealth could ever buy. The waitress had saved the day, transforming what could have been a disaster into the most memorable moment of the wedding. Guests would leave remembering not the glittering chandeliers or the vows, but the quiet strength of the woman who turned tears into calm with nothing more than her heart. The wedding was meant to be the most perfect day in the life of the billionaire CEO, a celebration crafted with precision to impress both the powerful elite and the cameras watching closely. The hall glittered with chandeliers, the tables overflowed with roses, and an orchestra filled the air with delicate music. The bride, radiant in her gown, smiled with rehearsed elegance as photographers captured every angle of her entrance. Everything appeared flawless, a picture of wealth and control, until the sound of crying disrupted the ceremony. The billionaire's twins, dressed in small tuxedos, began to wail loudly. At first, the guests assumed it was a small inconvenience, but the cries grew louder, echoing off the walls of the hall and drowning out the officiant's words. A ripple of discomfort passed through the audience, and soon whispers spread from row to row. The CEO, who could command respect with a single word in the boardroom, now stood helpless in front of his children. He bent down to comfort them, but his attempts failed, and the wailing only intensified. The bride's smile faltered, her irritation barely hidden as the moment meant to crown her with attention slipped away. Nannies and assistants rushed forward with toys and soothing words, but nothing seemed to calm the twins. The orchestra slowed, the officiant hesitated, and the ceremony stalled completely. Guests began exchanging glances, some shaking their heads, others smirking at the humiliation of the billionaire who seemed powerless in the most basic of struggles. Cameras continued to flash, capturing images that would soon spread, not of a perfect union, but of a wedding unraveling before the world. For a man who controlled markets and built an empire, the irony of being defeated by the cries of his own children stung deeply. The whispers grew louder as the guests judged his lack of control and the bride's growing frustration. The wedding teetered on the edge of collapse, and nothing seemed capable of restoring order. Then, in the middle of the chaos, a quiet, yet bold act changed everything. From the back of the hall, a young black waitress set down her tray and walked calmly toward the children. Gasps rose from the guests who could not understand why one of the staff would step into the spotlight during such an important moment. Yet her confidence carried her forward without hesitation. Kneeling before the twins, she reached out with gentle hands and began to hum a soothing melody. Her voice was soft, but carried a warmth that filled the entire hall. The twins, who had been inconsolable moments before, turned toward her with tearful eyes. Slowly, their cries softened, replaced by quiet sniffles as they rested their heads against her shoulder. Within moments, the chaos vanished, and silence filled the room once again. Guests stared in disbelief. The bride froze with astonishment, and the billionaire's stern expression melted into genuine gratitude. For the first time that day, he smiled with relief. Cameras flashed once more, but this time they captured something more powerful than wealth or luxury. They captured compassion, humanity, and a moment no one would forget. The waitress had not only saved the ceremony but reminded everyone that true strength lies not in riches but in kindness, leaving behind the most unforgettable memory of the night.